which is hard to find in Toronto. But now we have an area where the average price is actually below $400,000. In today's video, the 5 cheapest areas in Toronto for condominiums, according to the real estate market and the Toronto condo market. Let's get to it. Hello everyone, this is Sam from SaberiSixRealEstate and Remax Realtron Realty Inc. As always, you can find my contact information in the description box with regards to my Gmail, my Instagram, and my office. Feel free to get in touch with me with any questions you may have. Furthermore, subscribe, comment, rate, and review if you happen to enjoy my videos. Your support in that regard is greatly appreciated. Anyways, let's get on with today's video, which is actually building upon a poll I put up recently on my channel where I asked, the viewers of this channel, where you think the cheapest area in Toronto is for condominiums. Now, it wasn't a trick question by any means whatsoever. It was a pretty simple question, but I'm still surprised how many people actually got it quite right. And the right answer, which 68% of the people answering the poll said, was Toronto East and Scarborough. Now, Toronto East is more than just Scarborough, but when you say east side of Toronto and Toronto East, most people associate it with Scarborough. And according to the numbers, actually the cheapest areas for condominiums, with the exception of one specific area, but the cheapest ones in 2021 with regards to the Toronto condominium market is actually in Scarborough. By the time you're watching this, there will be a new poll up on my channel where the most expensive areas you think for condominiums are, and I'm gonna go through that in a different video as well. But for today's video, I'm gonna go through the areas that are cheapest for condominiums, break down and give you why certain areas are cheaper than others, and in general, why all these areas are so low in terms of average price, and what you can glean from this information. And before we get to the list, once again, please feel free to subscribe, comment, rate, and review, and you can find my contact information in the description box. Anyways, let's get on with the list. Number 5, the 5th cheapest area in Toronto for condominiums is E3 at an average price of $478,000 per condominium based on 17 transactions. On average, these condominiums were on the market for 28 days, meaning it took 28 days to sell them, which to me is actually surprisingly decent, believe it or not, because you see in the range of 20 to 30 days in certain areas where it's a very good and vibrant condominium market. You have the areas of Parkview Hills, Woodbine Heights. It's East York, technically speaking. It's not quite as far as east as other areas we will discuss in this video. And just above it is the areas of C11, so that's Leaside. So it's surrounded by better areas. And you have to understand one more thing, that these are large surfaced areas, right? In my other videos, when I go through downtown condo prices, Midtown, North York, I actually go through smaller geographic regions, communities which are smaller than these areas. So those are specific neighborhoods. In this video, we're doing larger areas that are not specific neighborhoods within E3 or C11, right? That's far more specific, and maybe I'll do that in the future. Moving on, number 4, the 4th cheapest area in the city of Toronto for condominiums, according to the Toronto real estate market in 2021. We have E8 at an average price of $465,000. Now E8 is further east and further south when we compare it to what we just discussed, which is E3. Now, and when you go through the properties that sold, the condominiums that are available, not even specific units, but condominium buildings that are in this area, you see one thing that's going to keep popping up throughout this list, and one thing I didn't mention for the preceding area, which is these areas have very old condominiums. Now, one thing specific to E8, first and foremost, believe it or not, it doesn't even have the oldest ones of this list. You're gonna obviously connect the dots and see that when we get to number 1 and number 2, those areas have the oldest condominiums. I mean, absolutely ancient condominiums. But E8 has old condominiums, and also E8 actually has quite a bit of few of condominium townhomes, which are not accounted for in this list. We're only looking at condominium apartments. Now, why is that important for me to bring up? Well, first and foremost, you should know that they're not accounted for. We're just looking at condominium apartments. And number two, where you have an area where you have a decent amount of condominium townhomes relative to the number of condominium apartments you have, that actually really does provide further context into the average price of that area, because condominium townhomes are very much so a related alternative good. Look at it like this: when you have two goods that are very similar to one another, the trends in price and other activities in the market for those goods affect one another greatly, and a lot of other ways where these two goods can impact each other. So the same thing applies in real estate, specifically condominium townhomes and condominium apartments. Now, the thing about condominium townhomes in this area is not as if they're brand new either. They're actually quite old condominium townhomes in this area, quite depleted as well. Number three, moving on, W10, wherein the average price is $457,000. As I earlier mentioned and I hinted towards, the only region within this list that's not in the east side of the city is actually on the west side of the city. So it's where you have Rexdale and Humber College, by Finch and Shepherd Islington, even further west of that, and then borders on Mississauga. And all the condominiums in this area is what I like to refer to as matchbox condominiums, these older matchbox designs, where if you can envision a matchbox, maybe an old matchbox, funny enough, where it's very rectangular with a lot of width and not that many stories, but it's not a low rise either. I'll maybe put some pictures in the description or in the video for you to get a good image of this. All right, next up, the second cheapest area in Toronto for condominiums is E11, coming in at $442,000. And perhaps the biggest attraction or the most noteworthy thing about this area of E11, for most people, is that where it's the Toronto Zoo resides, and it's just below Markham, right? If you are familiar with the map, it just resides right below Markham. Now, believe it or not, I would actually say the conditions of the buildings in this area are actually much better than the preceding entry on this list, which was W10. When we look at it per square foot, the maintenances are much higher, and also you have more inventory. And when you have more inventory, your average tends to be lower in a sense. And it's not as if it's more inventory of newer, more developed condominiums. It's more inventory of similar age and build of the preceding entries on this list. That's why, as a result, the average is lower, even though the conditions of the buildings are a bit better on average, in my professional opinion. I don't know, you may differ if you are familiar with both areas. Next up, and lastly, the cheapest area in Toronto for condominiums, according to the Toronto condominium market in 2021, is E10, coming in at an average of $375,000. That is below $400,000. Obviously, that's obvious. I shouldn't have mentioned that, but just to stress the point that this entire list was already below $500,000, which is hard to find in Toronto. But now we have an area where the average price is actually below $400,000. And the difference is between number two and number one is somewhere around $70,000. So what makes this area so cheap, and why is the average so low? Well, first and foremost, this number is actually only based upon 3 sales. So only 3 condominiums managed to sell here. Now, this is not as if it's 3 sales in contrast to a available inventory of maybe like 2,000. That's just to say that if we had an area hypothetically where there was only 3 sales, but there's only 6 condominium units, that's 50%, right? But no, that's not what we're working here. So that doesn't help the case at all. Secondly, if we look at this 3 sales, we had 1 sale that was actually in the $200,000 range. It sold for $279,000. And not only do you have some very, very old buildings, probably the oldest in these lists, but you have some very old buildings that are not exactly the best maintained either. You're looking at a very high maintenance per square foot. Some of these units, not the ones that specifically sold, but in the past I've looked at this area, it would be like 700 square feet, 800 square feet, but they would have a maintenance of 1,000 to 1,200, right? So that's pretty substantial. Anyways, that's the video for today. Thank you for watching. I have many more videos coming out. As always, feel free to subscribe, comment, rate, and review. I have a new poll up on my channel for the most expensive areas. I'll go through that as well. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned and stay safe.